My ex-girlfriend demands I pay her mortgage after she dumped me for her coworker and said I had no future. She left me 3 days before my 25th birthday. No warning, no real conversation. Just a text saying she needed someone with more ambition. Someone who could give her the life she deserved. That someone was a guy named Kevin from her marketing department. He drove a BMW, wore expensive watches, and apparently had a 5-year plan that included her. I was working as an electrician's apprentice, living in a small apartment, putting money away every month. She said I was thinking too small. She said Kevin was going places. A week later, she moved into his 4-bedroom house in the suburbs. She blocked my number and told our friends I was bitter. I wasn't bitter. I was devastated. We'd been together for 3 years. I thought we were building something. Turns out she was just waiting for a better offer. For the first 6 months, I was a mess. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, kept wondering what I did wrong. My older brother finally sat me down and told me to stop feeling sorry for myself. He said the best revenge is a good life. So I got to work. I finished my apprenticeship and got my license. Then I started taking every job I could find. Nights, weekends, holidays. I saved everything. When I was 27, I bought my first rental property, a small duplex on the east side of town. I fixed it up myself, rented both units, and used the income to save for another one. By 28, I owned 2 properties. By 30, I owned 5. I also got hired as a lead electrician for a commercial contractor. Good salary, good benefits, steady work. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. More importantly, I was building something real. During those 5 years, I heard things about Kevin through mutual friends. Turns out his 5-year plan didn't include keeping a job. He quit his marketing position to become a day trader. Then he quit day trading to become a life coach. Then he quit life coaching to find his true passion. Meanwhile, my ex was paying most of the mortgage on that 4-bedroom house. Then about 2 years ago, Kevin found his true passion. Her name was someone from his yoga class. He moved out, left my ex with the house, and apparently forgot to mention that he'd stopped contributing to the mortgage 8 months earlier. I didn't feel bad for her. I didn't feel anything, actually. I'd moved on. I was dating someone new, someone who actually respected what I was building. I figured my ex was just a chapter in my life that was closed forever. I was wrong. Last month, she showed up at one of my rental properties while I was doing maintenance. I didn't even recognize her at first. She looked tired, worn out. She said she got my address from a mutual friend. She said she needed to talk. She said she was in trouble. Her mortgage was 3 months behind. The bank was starting foreclosure proceedings. She'd burned through her savings trying to keep up with payments Kevin had stopped making. She needed help, and she figured since we had history, maybe I could lend her some money. Not a lot, she said. Just enough to get caught up. Maybe $20,000. I told her I'd think about it. I shouldn't have said that. I should have just said no. But I was so caught off guard that I defaulted to being polite. That was my mistake, because she took it as an opening. The text started the next day. Long messages about how hard things had been, how Kevin had ruined her financially, how she was working 2 jobs just to stay afloat, how she always knew I was the stable one, how she regretted leaving, how we could maybe try again if I helped her through this rough patch. The messages came 3 or 4 times a day, each one longer than the last, each one more desperate. Then they started getting demanding. She reminded me that she supported me emotionally during my apprenticeship. She said I owed her for those years. She said if I really cared about her, I'd help. She said I was being selfish with money I probably didn't even need. She said my new girlfriend was probably the reason I was being so cold. After 2 weeks of this, I stopped responding. That made it worse. She called my work phone on Tuesday morning while I was up on a scissor lift checking circuit panels at a downtown office building. I didn't recognize the number at first, so I answered thinking it might be a tenant or a supply company. Her voice came through shaky and tearful, asking why I was ignoring her messages. I hung up without saying anything and felt my stomach twist. She called back 3 times in the next hour. I let them all go to voicemail. During lunch break, I listened to the messages in my truck. The first one was her crying, saying she just needed me to understand how desperate things were. The second one had her voice getting sharper, asking if I felt good about myself for abandoning someone I claimed to care about. The third one was back to crying, begging me to at least talk to her like a human being. I deleted all 3 and tried to focus on the afternoon's work. Hannah, my supervisor, noticed me checking my phone every few minutes during our inspection of the electrical room. She asked if everything was okay, her tone professional but concerned. I told her everything was fine, just some personal stuff I was handling. She nodded and didn't push, but I could tell she knew something was off. I made myself put my phone in my truck for the rest of the day so I wouldn't keep looking at it. When I got back to my apartment that night, I had 17 new text messages. Most of them came after midnight. I scrolled through them while standing in my kitchen, not even bothering to take off my work boots. The 2 a.m. message said she couldn't sleep knowing I had money sitting in bank accounts while she was about to lose everything. The one at 2:47 a.m. said I clearly had enough for my rental properties and my comfortable life, so what was $20,000 to me? The one at 3:15 a.m. said she never thought I'd turn into someone so cold and selfish. I went to my phone settings and silenced notifications from her number. I didn't block it because part of me felt like that would be too aggressive, which I realize now was stupid. That night I barely slept, and when I did, I had dreams about being trapped in places I couldn't leave. The next morning, I met my girlfriend at the coffee shop near her work. She ordered her usual vanilla latte, and I got black coffee because I was too tired to think about what I wanted. We sat at a corner table, and she asked how I was doing, really doing, not just the automatic fine. I must have looked worse than I thought because her expression shifted to actual worry. I told her about the calls and the late-night messages. I told her about my ex showing up at the rental property and asking for $20,000. I told her I'd been dealing with this for weeks and didn't mention it because I thought I could handle it myself. I expected her to be upset that I kept it from her. Instead, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. She said my ex sounded like she was trying to manipulate me. She asked what I wanted to do, not what I thought I should do, and that question made something click in my head. I realized I'd been running through scenarios about obligation and history and whether I owed her something, but I hadn't actually asked myself if I wanted to help her. The answer was no. I didn't want to give her money. I didn't want to be involved in her problems. I didn't want her back in my life at all. My girlfriend squeezed my hand and said that was a completely reasonable feeling. She said I didn't owe my ex anything just because we used to date. She said the guilt I was feeling was probably left over from how my ex used to make me feel during our relationship. That observation stung because it was true. Later that afternoon, I texted my brother asking if he had time to talk. He called me within 5 minutes. I explained the whole situation while pacing around my living room. I told him about the money request, the escalating messages, the calls to my work phone. There was a long pause after I finished, and then he said he couldn't believe I was even considering this. His voice got louder as he reminded me how destroyed I was 5 years ago. He brought up how she called me unambitious while I was working 60-hour weeks to build a career. He said this was exactly the kind of guilt trip she always used on me, making me feel like I wasn't doing enough or being enough. He said she left me for someone she thought had more money, and now that her plan failed, she was coming back to me like an ATM machine. He told me to send her one message saying no, and then stop responding completely. He said to keep it short and emotionless, so she couldn't twist my words. I sat down on my couch after we hung up and opened a new text message. I typed it out 3 times before I got the wording right. The final version said I wouldn't be lending her money and I needed her to stop contacting me. I read it over twice, then sent it before I could second-guess myself. My phone showed she read it almost immediately. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with her response. I made myself wait before looking at it. When I finally opened the message, it was a wall of text that I had to scroll through. She called me heartless and selfish. She said she never realized who I really was until now. She said I was punishing her for choosing Kevin and that I was petty and vindictive. She said the money meant nothing to me but everything to her, and I was choosing to let her suffer out of spite. She said she hoped I could live with myself. She said she'd supported me emotionally during my apprenticeship when I was broke and stressed, and this was how I repaid her. She said she always knew I'd become arrogant if I ever got money. I put my phone face down on the coffee table and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking. I felt angry and guilty and justified all at the same time. I didn't respond. The next day, I had to replace a water heater at my duplex on the east side. I got there around 9 in the morning and parked in the small lot behind the building. The work took about 3 hours because the old unit had corroded fittings that I had to cut out. When I came back outside carrying my toolbox, I saw her car parked near my truck. My whole body went tense. She was sitting in the driver's seat watching me. I don't know how she knew I'd be there. Maybe she'd been driving by my properties looking for my truck. Maybe she'd figured out my schedule somehow. I walked to my truck and opened the door, planning to just leave. She got out of her car before I could pull away. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She walked toward my truck and said we needed to talk face to face like adults. I rolled down my window about 3 inches, just enough to hear her but not enough to feel trapped. I told her I wasn't lending her money and she needed to leave. She started crying, her shoulders shaking as she leaned against my truck. She said I was the only person who ever really understood her. She said Kevin never saw her the way I did. She said she made a mistake leaving me and she knew that now. She said if I helped her get through this, maybe we could figure things out between us. I didn't say anything. I just looked at her and felt nothing except the need to get away from this situation. When I didn't respond, her whole face changed. The tears stopped and her expression went hard. She brought up specific things I'd said during our relationship about being there for people I cared about. She quoted me almost word for word, saying I'd told her I'd never abandon someone I loved. She said I'd promised I wasn't like other guys who just disappeared when things got hard. I realized she was using my own words against me, weaponizing things I'd said when I was 22 and trying to prove I was worth keeping. She was using the person I used to be to manipulate the person I am now. I told her clearly that showing up at my properties was harassment and I needed her to leave. She started to say something else, but I rolled up my window and backed out of the parking space. She stood there watching me drive away. My hands shook on the steering wheel for the entire drive home. Confrontation still makes me anxious even after all these years. But I was also proud of myself for holding that boundary, for not letting her tears or her anger change my answer. That evening, my girlfriend came over with takeout from the Thai place we both like. We ate on the couch and I told her about what happened at the duplex. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said we should start documenting everything. She said if this kept escalating, I might need a record of it. The suggestion made me feel paranoid at first, like I was overreacting to what was just a messy situation with an ex. But she pointed out that my ex had already found my work number, my rental properties, and my girlfriend's Instagram. She said that wasn't normal breakup behavior. She said that was someone who wasn't respecting boundaries. I got my laptop and started going through my text messages, taking screenshots of everything my ex had sent over the past 3 weeks. There were more than I remembered. I saved them all in a folder and started a document noting the dates and times she'd shown up at my properties. I wrote down when she called my work phone and when she contacted my girlfriend. Seeing it all laid out like that made it feel more real and more serious. My girlfriend sat next to me the whole time, her hand on my back, and I felt less alone in dealing with this. Having a plan made me feel less powerless, like I was taking control of the situation instead of just reacting to whatever she did next. The next morning, my girlfriend showed me her phone while we were having coffee. She'd gotten a direct message on Instagram from someone she didn't know. The message introduced the sender as my ex-girlfriend and said she was worried about me because I'd been acting strange and cold lately. My girlfriend asked if she should respond or just block her, and I could see she was annoyed but trying to stay calm for my sake. I told her to block her without responding. My girlfriend did it right away, but I could feel something shift in my chest. This was different from all the texts and voicemails and showing up at my properties. This was my ex dragging my girlfriend into the mess, crossing a line from my past directly into my present. I'd been handling the harassment by myself, trying to keep it contained, but now it was touching the most important relationship in my life. The anger I felt was sharper than anything I'd experienced during the previous weeks. It wasn't the sad, confused anger from when she first started contacting me. This was protective anger, the kind that made my hands shake and my jaw clench. My girlfriend sat across from me at the kitchen table and squeezed my hand, saying it was okay, and she knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. But I could see the violation had affected her too. Someone from my past had invaded her space, used her social media to try to manipulate the situation, and made her part of something she had nothing to do with. That evening, I kept thinking about how this wouldn't stop on its own. My ex had proven she would keep finding new ways to contact me, new pressure points to push. I'd tried ignoring her, tried being clear about my boundaries, and she just kept escalating. 2 days later, I was at a commercial job site when my phone buzzed with a text from Brendan, one of my tenants in the East Side duplex. He asked why some woman had come by asking questions about me and whether I was a good landlord. My stomach dropped. I stood there in the middle of the construction site with my phone in my hand, feeling sick. She was now affecting my business relationships, potentially threatening my rental income and the reputation I'd built with my tenants. I texted Brendan back immediately, apologizing and saying I'd call him after work. The rest of the day dragged. I couldn't focus on the electrical work I was supposed to be doing. Hannah noticed and asked again if I was okay, and this time I told her I was dealing with some personal stuff, but would have it sorted out soon. When I got off work, I called Brendan from my truck. He answered on the second ring, and I apologized for the intrusion. I explained briefly that an ex-girlfriend was having trouble accepting boundaries, and I was sorry she'd bothered him. Brendan was understanding, saying these things happen, but he mentioned his wife had been uncomfortable with a stranger asking personal questions about their landlord. I reassured him it wouldn't happen again, though I wasn't actually sure I could prevent it. After we hung up, I sat in my truck for a long time. My ex had now contacted my girlfriend, shown up at my work sites, and approached my tenants. The harassment was spreading like an infection through every part of my life I'd built. That night, my brother came over. I texted him about what happened with Brendan, and he showed up at my apartment with takeout and a serious expression. We ate in silence for a few minutes before he said I needed to consider legal options. He said this had moved beyond awkward into actual harassment that was affecting my work and tenants. I wanted to argue, to say I could handle it myself, but I knew he was right. My brother offered to help me find a lawyer who handles this kind of situation, and I reluctantly agreed. The next morning, my brother sent me contact information for an attorney named Roland Fisher, who specialized in harassment and stalking cases. I called Roland's office and made an appointment for later that week. The receptionist asked me to bring documentation of all contact attempts, so I spent that evening organizing everything. Screenshots of texts, dates, and times of her physical appearances at my properties, notes about the calls to my work phone and the contact with my girlfriend and Brendan. Seeing it all laid out made me realize how much had actually happened in just 3 weeks. Roland's office was downtown in a professional building. He was in his 50s with gray hair and a calm way of talking that made me feel less anxious. I sat across from his desk and walked through the timeline of contact. Roland took notes and asked specific questions about each incident. When I finished, he said I had clear grounds for a cease and desist letter and potentially a restraining order if the behavior continued. He explained that the cease and desist would create a legal record of my explicit request for no contact, which would strengthen any future legal action if she ignored it. The letter would cost me money I'd rather not spend, probably around $500 for Roland to draft and send it properly. He said it was an investment in my peace of mind and protection, and I agreed to move forward. Roland said he'd have the letter drafted within a few days and would send it via certified mail, so there was proof of delivery. While Roland worked on the letter over the next few days, I tried to focus on work and my regular life. But my ex posted a vague status on Facebook about how success changes people and makes them forget who supported them when they had nothing. I didn't see it myself because I'd unfollowed her months ago, but several mutual friends must have seen it because Harper, someone I hadn't talked to in years, sent me a message asking if I was okay. Harper and I had been friends during my relationship with my ex, part of the same social group that mostly dissolved after the breakup. I messaged Harper back honestly, explaining that my ex had asked for a large loan I declined and was now harassing me about it. Harper seemed surprised, saying the Facebook post made it sound like I'd wronged her somehow. Harper mentioned that my ex had been posting a lot lately about financial struggles and betrayal, building a narrative online that painted her as the victim. I thanked Harper for reaching out and said I was handling the situation legally now, which seemed to satisfy her curiosity. Over the next few days, 3 more mutual friends reached out with messages that ranged from supportive to cautiously neutral. One said she'd heard I was going through something difficult and wanted me to know she was thinking of me. Another asked vaguely if everything was okay, clearly fishing for information. The third sent a longer message saying he'd seen some posts and wanted to hear my side before making any judgments. I responded to each one briefly, explaining the basic situation without going into excessive detail. I realized my ex was trying to control the narrative in our old social circle, painting herself as the victim of my newfound success and my refusal to help someone I'd once cared about. The frustration of being misunderstood made my chest tight, but I reminded myself that anyone who actually mattered in my life knew the truth. I kept my phone in my pocket that evening and didn't check social media once. Roland had been clear about not engaging publicly, and even though it made my jaw tight to think about her version of events sitting out there unchallenged, I knew he was right. My girlfriend found me staring at the wall around 9 o'clock and sat down next to me on the couch. She said the people who actually knew me wouldn't suddenly think I'd become a different person just because my ex posted some vague complaints online. She reminded me that my brother knew the truth. My coworkers knew my character. My tenants respected how I ran my business. The opinions of people I hadn't talked to in 5 years didn't change any of that. I nodded and felt some of the tension leave my shoulders, but part of me still wanted to screenshot everything and send detailed explanations to every mutual friend who might be reading her posts. Roland called me 2 days later to say he'd sent the cease and desist letter via certified mail. My stomach did a weird flip when he said it, half relief and half nervousness about what would happen when she received it. He walked me through what the letter said, how it clearly stated that all contact had to stop immediately, how it listed every documented incident of harassment with dates and times, how it warned about legal consequences if the behavior continued. I thanked him and hung up, then sat in my truck outside the rental property I'd been working on and just breathed for a minute. The letter was out there now, making this whole situation official and legal instead of just personal drama I was trying to handle quietly. For 2 full days, my phone stayed silent. No texts, no calls, no messages through mutual friends. I kept checking it anyway, expecting something, but nothing came. I slept better those 2 nights than I had in weeks, actually making it through until morning without waking up to check for notifications. My girlfriend and I had a normal weekend. the kind we used to have before all this started. We went out for breakfast on Saturday, walked around downtown looking at shops, came home and watched movies without me constantly pulling out my phone. She commented on how relaxed I seemed, and I realized she was right. The legal letter had apparently scared my ex enough to back off, and maybe this whole thing was actually over. Monday morning destroyed that hope. I was getting ready for work, already running through the day's job list in my head, when my phone buzzed with a text from my ex. This one was different from all the others. No desperation or pleading or anger. Just cold and formal, like she was sending a business email. It said I'd regret not helping her when she needed it, that karma had a way of working things out, that people who turned their backs on others eventually got what was coming to them. I read it 3 times, my anxiety spiking even though the message itself wasn't an explicit threat. The implied menace in those calm words felt worse somehow than all her previous emotional outbursts. I forwarded the message to Roland before I even finished my coffee. He called me back within an hour and said it was good I'd documented it, but the message didn't constitute a direct enough threat to pursue a restraining order yet. He explained that courts needed more concrete evidence of danger, or explicit threats and vague statements about karma and regret didn't meet that standard. He told me to keep ignoring all contact and document anything else that happened, that we were building a paper trail even if we couldn't take immediate legal action. I felt frustrated but understood what he was saying. The law moved slower than I wanted it to, required more proof than seemed reasonable, but that's how the system worked. My ex posted another Facebook status that afternoon. I didn't see it myself because I'd stopped checking her page, but Harper sent me a screenshot with a message asking if I was okay. The post said something about how lawyers and legal threats were what cowards used when they couldn't face their own guilt, how real men handled their responsibilities instead of hiding behind attorneys. Several people had already commented with supportive messages, telling her to stay strong and that she deserved better. I stared at the screenshot for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I wanted to send Harper the whole truth, wanted to screenshot all the harassment messages and post them publicly so everyone could see what was really happening. But Roland's warning about not engaging publicly stopped me. I thanked Harper for checking in and said I was handling some stuff but was fine, keeping it vague enough that I wasn't feeding into the drama. My brother took me out for drinks that Thursday evening at a bar near his place. He ordered us both whiskey and told me I looked like I needed it, which was probably true. I showed him the Facebook screenshot and started explaining how frustrated I was that people were believing her version of events, how it bothered me that our old friends thought I was the bad guy in this situation. He let me talk for a few minutes, then cut me off and said something that stopped me cold. He pointed out that anyone who actually mattered in my life knew the truth, and social media opinions from people I hadn't seen in 5 years didn't affect my actual life in any meaningful way. He asked me to name one person whose opinion I actually cared about who believed her story, and I couldn't. My girlfriend knew the truth. He knew the truth. My coworkers had seen my character for years. My tenants respected me. The rest was just noise from people who didn't know me anymore, and whose lives didn't intersect with mine in any real way. He was right, and I knew he was right, but the feeling of being misunderstood still sat heavy in my chest. Work became my escape over the next 2 weeks. I threw myself into a major commercial project, a new office building that needed complete electrical installation. The physical work felt good, pulling wire through conduit and mounting junction boxes and solving problems that had clear solutions. Hannah noticed the change in my focus during a site meeting and commented that I seemed sharper than I'd been in a while, more present and engaged with the work. I didn't tell her that the job site was the only place where I wasn't thinking about legal letters and harassment and social media posts. The problems there made sense, had right answers, could be fixed with the proper tools and knowledge. Everything else in my life felt complicated and messy, but running electrical for a commercial build was straightforward. My girlfriend brought it up one evening while we were making dinner together in her apartment. She said we needed to talk about how this whole situation had affected our relationship, and my stomach dropped because I thought she was going to say it was too much drama. Instead, she admitted she'd been worried at first that I still had feelings for my ex, that all the emotional energy I was spending on the situation meant I wasn't really over the relationship. I stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her, seeing the vulnerability in her expression. I told her honestly that seeing my ex desperate and manipulative had only reinforced how right the breakup was, how grateful I felt for a relationship built on respect instead of conditions. I said watching my ex try to guilt and harass me into giving her money had shown me exactly why we'd never worked, how she'd always seen me as a resource instead of a partner. My girlfriend relaxed visibly and said she'd needed to hear that she trusted me, but the situation had made her question things she normally wouldn't doubt. A month passed after the cease and desist letter went out, and I hadn't heard anything directly from my ex. The texts stopped, the calls stopped, no more appearances at my rental properties. Her social media presence continued, though, posts about financial stress and betrayal, and how hard it was to rebuild after being abandoned. I found myself checking her Facebook page every few days, scrolling through the updates and reading the sympathetic comments from people who didn't know the full story. My girlfriend caught me doing it one night and gently took my phone out of my hands. She said I was torturing myself with information I couldn't control, that reading her posts wasn't helping me move forward. I knew she was right, but deleting the app from my phone felt like giving up somehow, like letting my ex control the narrative completely. My girlfriend pointed out that the narrative didn't matter to anyone who actually knew me, and I finally uninstalled Facebook from my phone that night. The next week, Harper sent me a message saying she'd run into my ex at a coffee shop downtown. The conversation had been uncomfortable, Harper said, because my ex kept bringing me up and talking about how I'd abandoned her when she needed help most. Harper tried to stay neutral, but felt like she was recruited to take sides, like my ex was building a case against me to anyone who would listen. I thanked Harper for telling me, and explained I was trying to move forward without engaging in any drama. Harper seemed to respect that approach, and mentioned that several mutual friends were uncomfortable with how my ex kept bringing up the past and making everything about her financial problems. It was good to know that people were seeing through the narrative my ex was trying to create, even if I wasn't defending myself publicly. A few days later, Brendan called to say he wanted to renew his lease early, which surprised me because he still had 4 months left on his current term. When I stopped by to drop off the new paperwork, he mentioned he appreciated how I'd handled the awkward situation with my ex showing up at the property. He said it showed professionalism and made him feel secure about renting from me long term. The comment stuck with me because I hadn't thought about how maintaining my boundaries protected not just my peace of mind, but also my business reputation. My tenants needed to trust that their homes wouldn't become scenes for my personal drama, and I'd managed to keep that separation intact. My girlfriend suggested we take a weekend trip to the coast, just the two of us, to get away from everything for a while. I agreed immediately because I needed the break more than I wanted to admit. We drove up on Friday afternoon, checked into a small hotel near the beach, and I deliberately left my phone in the room for most of the weekend. We walked along the shore, ate seafood at a restaurant with plastic tablecloths, and spent Saturday evening sitting on the hotel balcony watching the sunset. My girlfriend told me she could see the difference in my stress level when I wasn't anticipating the next contact or social media post. I realized she was right. For 2 days, I felt like myself again, not someone constantly braced for the next crisis. When I finally checked my phone Sunday evening before we left, there was nothing from my ex. Instead, my brother had sent several funny memes and messages checking in to see how I was doing. The absence of drama felt strange at first, like waiting for something bad to happen, but gradually I started to accept that maybe the legal letter had actually worked. 2 months after everything started, I was doing routine maintenance at my original duplex when I noticed something while carrying tools back to my truck. The for sale sign had gone up on my ex's house in the suburbs. I could see it from where I was parked because her street intersected with the one behind my property. My stomach did a weird flip because I knew this meant the foreclosure had gone through and she was losing the house Kevin had left her with. I stood there for a minute, toolbox in hand, staring at that sign and feeling a complicated mix of emotions I hadn't expected. Part of me felt relieved that she wouldn't be able to contact me about money anymore because the crisis she'd been trying to make my responsibility was finally resolving itself. But I also felt genuine sadness that her life had fallen apart this way, even though I knew it wasn't my responsibility to fix. That evening, I told my girlfriend about seeing the sign, and she listened as I processed these conflicting feelings without trying to tell me what I should feel. She just sat with me on the couch while I worked through the fact that I could feel bad for someone without owing them anything. A week later, Harper messaged again with news that my ex had moved back in with her parents in a different state and was apparently starting over with a new job there. The information felt like a final chapter closing, and I realized I'd been waiting for some kind of ending to the situation without knowing it. I called Roland to ask if I needed to do anything else legally now that my ex had moved away. He said the cease and desist letter remained in effect, but the physical distance made further harassment unlikely. He congratulated me on handling a difficult situation with appropriate boundaries and said most people struggle more with holding firm when an ex tries to manipulate them. I thanked him for his help and hung up feeling like I'd actually managed something important. Not just survived it, but handled it correctly. My brother and I met for our regular monthly dinner at the barbecue place we always went to, and halfway through the meal he brought up how different I seemed compared to 3 months ago when this all started. I thought about it while finishing my pulled pork sandwich and realized he was right. I was sleeping better, not checking my phone every few minutes and feeling more confident in my ability to protect my own boundaries. The whole experience had taught me something about the difference between being polite and being a doormat, between caring about someone's struggles and taking responsibility for problems I didn't create. At work the following week, Hannah pulled me aside during our morning break and said she'd noticed I seemed stressed for a while, But whatever was going on appeared resolved now. I appreciated that she'd given me space to handle it privately while still noticing and caring. It reinforced that I'd built a good professional life with people who respected boundaries. She didn't pry for details, just said she was glad I seemed more like myself again. That same evening, my girlfriend brought up moving in together while we were making dinner at her place. We'd mentioned it casually before, but never seriously planned anything. She said going through the harassment situation together showed her how well we communicated during stress, and she felt ready for the next step. I realized I felt the same way. The experience had tested our relationship in ways normal dating wouldn't have, and we'd handled it as a team. I started thinking about my ex less and less over the following weeks. When she did cross my mind, it was with a kind of detached understanding rather than anger or hurt. She'd made choices based on what she thought she wanted, and those choices had natural consequences that weren't my responsibility to fix. I could see now that she'd always been chasing something external rather than building something real. One of my other tenants called to give notice that they were buying their own house. As I started the process of finding new renters, I felt proud of the small business I'd built. This was what my ex had called thinking too small 5 years ago, but it had given me stability and independence. I scheduled property showings and updated my rental listings, feeling confident in what I'd created. My girlfriend and I spent the next few weekends looking at apartments together. We found one we both loved, bigger than either of our current places, with space for a home office where I could handle my rental property paperwork. The second bedroom had good natural light and room for a desk and filing cabinets. Signing the lease together felt like a statement that we were building something real and lasting. We picked up the keys on a Saturday morning and stood in the empty living room planning where our furniture would go. As we packed up my current apartment over the next week, I found an old photo of my ex and me from early in our relationship tucked in a box of random items. We looked young and happy, taken at some outdoor concert we'd gone to. Instead of the sharp pain I would have felt a year ago, I just felt grateful for who I'd become since then. I threw the photo away without ceremony, tossing it in the trash bag with old papers and broken electronics. My brother showed up on moving day with his truck and helped us load furniture. Over pizza afterward in our new living room, he brought up how 5 years ago he'd told me the best revenge is a good life. He said he was proud that I'd actually done the work instead of just talking about it. His approval meant more than I expected, and I realized how much his tough love back then had shaped my recovery. We sat on the floor eating pizza off paper plates, and he joked that the new place looked too grown up for me. A few days later, Harper sent me a message saying she wanted me to know that my ex was apparently doing okay in her new city and had stopped posting about the past on social media. Harper said she thought I'd want to know there was no lingering drama. I appreciated the closure and thanked her for reaching out. It felt like a final door closing on that chapter of my life. My girlfriend suggested we have a housewarming party to celebrate the new apartment. I realized I'd been thinking of her as just my girlfriend when she was so much more than that. She was my partner, someone I was building a life with. I agreed about the party, wanting to fill our space with people who were actually part of our present and future. We spent an evening making a guest list and planning food. The housewarming party happened on a Saturday afternoon 2 weeks after we moved in. I was surrounded by coworkers, friends I'd made over the past few years, my brother and some of my girlfriend's friends who'd become mine too. Looking around the room, I realized I'd built a completely different life than the one I had with my ex. These were people who knew the person I'd become, not the person I was trying to be back then. Hannah from work was talking to my brother about a commercial project. My girlfriend was laughing with her best friend in the kitchen. Someone had brought a board game and people were setting it up on our new dining table. Hannah caught me on the phone with one of my tenants during the party, handling a question about a leaky faucet while balancing a beer in my other hand. When I hung up, she laughed and said she was impressed by how I juggled property management like it was nothing. A few other people overheard and started asking questions about real estate investing, wanting to know how I got started and whether it was worth the hassle. I found myself explaining how I bought my first duplex, fixed it up myself, learned to screen tenants and handle maintenance calls. My girlfriend watched from across the room with this proud smile that made me feel like I'd actually accomplished something real. Someone asked if I ever regretted not going to college for business, and I said honestly that hands-on experience taught me more than any classroom would have. The conversation felt good, like I was finally comfortable talking about what I'd built without downplaying it or feeling like I needed to prove anything. Most guests had left by 11, just a few stragglers finishing drinks and helping us clean up plates and cups. My girlfriend and I finally sat down on our new couch, the one we'd spent 3 weekends shopping for because she wanted something durable and I wanted something comfortable. She leaned against me and asked if I was happy, really happy, not just okay or getting by. I thought about it for a minute because the question deserved a real answer. I realized I genuinely was happy, but not in some dramatic movie way where everything was perfect. It was more like standing on solid ground after years of feeling like I might fall through the floor at any moment. I told her yes, I was happy, and she squeezed my hand and said she could tell. We sat there in our new living room surrounded by half-empty cups and the mess of a good party, and it felt exactly right. The next morning, I woke up in our apartment and reached for my phone out of pure habit, that automatic check for bad news or stressful messages. But there was nothing waiting for me except a text from my brother saying he had a good time at the party. My girlfriend was already up, making coffee in our kitchen, and I could hear her humming something while she moved around. I got up and joined her, and we stood there drinking coffee in our pajamas, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The ordinariness of the moment hit me as the best possible outcome of everything I'd been through. No drama, no crisis, no desperate messages demanding my attention. Just coffee and morning light coming through our windows and someone who actually wanted to be there with me. I met with my accountant the following week to review my rental property finances for the year. She spread out the numbers across her desk and walked me through the income and expenses, pointing out where I'd done better than expected and where I could improve. The properties showed steady growth, reliable income every month, and my maintenance costs were lower than average because I did most of the work myself. She leaned back in her chair and said I was in a position to consider purchasing another property next year if I wanted to expand. The validation felt good, hearing from someone who looked at numbers all day that I was doing this right. I told her I'd think about it, maybe look for another duplex on the east side where I knew the neighborhood. She made notes and said we could run projections in a few months to see what made sense financially. My girlfriend called me at work a few days later, her voice excited in a way I didn't hear often. She'd gotten a promotion at her job, a position she'd been working toward for over a year. I told her we needed to celebrate properly, so that weekend we went to a nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place where they fold your napkin when you go to the bathroom. Over dinner, we talked about our future plans, what we wanted to build together, where we saw ourselves in 5 years. She mentioned wanting to eventually buy a house together, maybe something with a yard and space for an office. Instead of feeling trapped by the commitment like I might have years ago, I felt excited about building something with someone who valued the same things I did. She understood that stability wasn't boring, that planning ahead wasn't thinking too small. We stayed at the restaurant until they started stacking chairs, just talking about possibilities. I ran into one of the mutual friends from my past relationship at a hardware store a week later. We were both in the electrical aisle and he recognized me first. The conversation was brief but friendly, catching up on basic life stuff without any awkwardness. He didn't bring up my ex or the drama from months ago, didn't ask uncomfortable questions or try to get information. I realized that whole chapter had faded into irrelevance for most people, just old history that nobody thought about anymore. We talked about his new job and my rental properties, shook hands and went back to shopping. Walking to my truck afterward, I felt lighter knowing that the past really was past for everyone, except the people who insisted on living there. My brother called me later that week and said something that caught me off guard. He'd been bragging about me to his coworkers, talking about how I built a rental property business from nothing after a bad breakup nearly destroyed me. He said his boss asked questions about real estate investing and wanted to know how someone gets started in that field. Hearing the pride in my brother's voice reminded me that the people who matter have always seen my worth, even when I doubted it myself. He'd been there during the worst of it 5 years ago, watching me barely function, and now he got to see what came from actually doing the work, instead of just talking about it. I thanked him for believing in me back then, for giving me that tough love when I needed it. He laughed and said he knew I'd figure it out eventually. I just needed a push. During a quiet evening at home, my girlfriend asked if I ever thought about my ex anymore. I appreciated that she felt comfortable enough to ask the question directly instead of dancing around it. I told her honestly that I occasionally wondered if my ex was doing okay in her new city, whether she'd found some stability, but I didn't feel any remaining emotional attachment. The person I was with back then felt like someone completely different from who I am now. My girlfriend said that was healthy, that it showed I'd genuinely moved on rather than just suppressing feelings or pretending the relationship never happened. We were sitting on our couch with a movie paused on the TV, and she said she felt secure knowing I'd processed that chapter of my life instead of carrying it around like unfinished business. I was doing electrical work at one of my rental properties the next week, replacing some outlets in the living room. I stood up to grab my drill and realized I was in almost the exact spot where my ex had ambushed me months ago, demanding money and making me feel guilty about my success. But the memory didn't trigger anxiety anymore, didn't make my chest tight or my hands shake. The property was just a property again, not a site of emotional ambush. I finished the work and locked up, checking that everything was secure before I left. Driving away, I noticed I hadn't thought about that confrontation in weeks, hadn't replayed it in my head, or wondered what I could have said differently. As winter set in and the days got shorter, I spent an evening reviewing my goals for the next year. I sat at our dining table with my laptop and a notebook, writing down what I wanted to accomplish. Potentially another rental property if the numbers worked out and I could find the right place. Continuing to build my electrical career, maybe taking on more complex commercial projects, and maybe proposing to my girlfriend when the time felt right, when we'd been living together long enough to know this was what we both wanted. These were the ambitious plans my ex said I didn't have 5 years ago, but they were real and achievable because I built them on actual work instead of fantasies. I closed my notebook and looked around our apartment, at the life we were creating together, and felt ready for whatever came next. Thanksgiving morning started with my girlfriend and me pushing our small dining table against the wall to make room for the folding table my brother was bringing over. We'd invited 8 people total, and our apartment wasn't built for hosting that many. But we made it work by moving the couch and setting up chairs borrowed from 3 different neighbors. My brother showed up first with the extra table and a pumpkin pie his wife had made, and he helped me arrange everything while my girlfriend finished cooking the turkey. Her parents arrived next, followed by 2 of her cousins, then Hannah from work with her husband, and finally 2 friends I'd made through my rental property networking group. The apartment felt crowded in a good way, full of voices and the smell of food and people laughing while they squeezed past each other to reach the kitchen. We sat down to eat around 3 in the afternoon, plates piled high with turkey and stuffing and green beans, and I looked around the table at all these people who'd become part of my life over the past few years. Hannah was telling a funny story about a job site disaster, my brother was arguing good-naturedly with my girlfriend's dad about football, and everyone seemed comfortable and happy to be there. Nobody mentioned my ex or the drama from earlier in the year, because that whole situation had faded into old history that didn't matter anymore. I realized I'd built this. Not just the meal or the gathering, but the whole network of relationships and the stable life that made moments like this possible. My girlfriend squeezed my hand under the table and smiled at me, and I felt grateful in a way that had nothing to do with the holiday, and everything to do with the work I'd put into becoming someone who could create and maintain good things. The envelope from Roland arrived in my mailbox the following week, a standard business envelope with his law firm's return address printed in the corner. I opened it while standing in my building's lobby and found a final invoice for his legal services, itemized with dates and descriptions of the work he'd done. The total was less than I'd expected, maybe because the situation had resolved itself without needing to go to court or file additional motions. There was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the invoice, just a few lines in neat handwriting saying he was glad everything had worked out and that he hoped I wouldn't need his services again. I folded the invoice and note back into the envelope and took them upstairs to my apartment, where I wrote a check for the full amount immediately. Paying it didn't feel like a burden or an unwanted expense, even though the money could have gone toward other things. Roland had given me tools I didn't have on my own, the legal language and formal process that made my boundaries real and enforceable, instead of just words I said that my ex could ignore. He'd helped me protect the life I'd built when I couldn't figure out how to do it myself, and that was worth every dollar on the invoice. I put the check in the return envelope he'd included, sealed it, and stuck a stamp on it before walking down to the corner mailbox to send it off. Walking back to my apartment, I felt like I'd closed the last administrative piece of that whole mess, the final transaction that officially ended a chapter I was ready to stop thinking about. It was a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. Nothing special about the day or the weather or anything we were doing. My girlfriend and I had both gotten home from work around the same time, changed into comfortable clothes and made simple dinners that we ate on the couch while we picked something to watch on TV. We settled on a documentary about national parks that neither of us cared about too much, the kind of thing you put on when you just want background noise and company. About halfway through, I noticed my girlfriend had gone quiet and still, and when I looked down, I saw she'd fallen asleep with her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. I stayed very still so I wouldn't wake her, one arm around her shoulders and the TV playing quietly in front of us. The apartment was warm and comfortable, dishes from dinner still sitting on the coffee table, my work boots by the door next to her shoes. This was the most ordinary moment possible, nothing dramatic or exciting or worth telling anyone about, just 2 people existing together in a space they'd made their own. But sitting there with my girlfriend asleep against me, I realized this peaceful, boring, completely normal evening was exactly what I'd needed after years of chaos and uncertainty and emotional crisis. The drama with my ex had been exhausting, all that anger and guilt and manipulation and stress, and before that, the breakup itself had nearly destroyed me. What I had now was stable and quiet and predictable in the best possible way, and I felt content in a deep, settled way I'd never experienced before. I didn't want excitement or intensity or grand romantic gestures. I wanted exactly this: Tuesday evenings on the couch with someone who felt like home. Sitting there in the quiet apartment, I started thinking about something my ex had said during one of her angry texts months ago. She'd accused me of changing, of becoming someone cold and selfish who forgot where he came from and who'd helped him along the way. At the time, I'd dismissed it as manipulation, just another attempt to make me feel guilty enough to give her what she wanted. But she was actually right about one thing. I had changed. The person I was at 22 when we first got together was different from who I was now at 30. Back then, I would have given her the money despite my better judgment, would have let guilt and obligation override my own needs and boundaries, would have sacrificed my stability to avoid feeling like a bad person. I'd been conditioned to believe that caring about someone meant prioritizing their needs over my own, that being a good partner meant absorbing whatever chaos they brought into my life. But I didn't change because success corrupted me or made me forget my roots like she implied. I changed because I learned through painful experience that I could value stability over chaos, that I could choose genuine partnership over conditional approval, and that I could respect myself enough to maintain boundaries even when someone tried to guilt me into dropping them. The best revenge really was building a good life, just like my brother had told me 5 years ago when I was barely functional. And now I wasn't pursuing revenge at all. I was just living the life I'd built, enjoying the peace I'd earned and protecting what mattered to me. My ex was somewhere in another state starting over, and I genuinely hoped she found whatever she was looking for. But her problems weren't mine to solve anymore. I had my own life now, my own home, my own future, and I was finally comfortable just living it.